Namaskar. A warm welcome to all of you. Myself, CA Vivek Khurana, and I hope you all are very fine. Today we will discuss on equalization levy and MLI, multilateral instrument. And for that, we have with us very young and dynamic person, CA Gaurav Makhijani ji. Gaurav ji, a warm welcome to you, and thank you very
Mr.
much for accepting our invitation and giving us time, your valuable time. Now it's over to you. Gauravji, please guide us because we have received many queries in earlier session also regarding MLI. So my request to you, please guide us regarding the MLI. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Khurana, for this brief and very nice introduction. And we'll take up the multilateral and equalization levy today. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this wonderful opportunity which is given to me. And I must say that this is a great initiative by CA Sansar team and by yourself of contributing to the PM Relief Fund. I hope that this will give a boost to our corpus fund, and it will be used by the government for good cause, which they are actually working very hard day and night. So without wasting any time, I'll just proceed with my presentation on MLI and equalization levy, which is a part of OECD and G20 nation, which was started in 2008 somewhere when this recession was there in the economy, and a lot of countries were not able to finance their own investment, and there was some confusion related to the tax of how to tax the cross-border transactions. So I'll take up the agenda. I have divided in two parts. One is the multilateral instrument, wherein I will discuss the background of MLI. Then I'll cover the overview. Then I'll briefly touch upon the articles of MLI. There are total 39 articles, which I'll discuss one by one in very brief. And then I'll most important part would be to understand the India's position on the MLI in each article. So I'll discuss what India has decided to act upon on the each article of the MLI, and then I'll go and discuss the impact of the MLI on our existing tax treaties, and then what, as a CA or as a tax professional or as a finance professional, we need to understand while dealing with such change. So basically what we actually need to do is very important for us to understand. And on the second part of our presentation, we'll discuss on the newly extended scope of equalization levy, where we'll discuss the background of equalization levy and the extended scope of what all has been included in the equalization levy. And then we'll come on to the issues one by one, what all issues will be faced by the finance professional or the tax professional, and what all we need to keep in mind while dealing with such a new law. So coming on to the first part of MLI, I'll just give you a brief overview of base erosion and profit shifting program, which was introduced by G20 and the OECD nations. So basically, it goes back to 2008 crisis when there was a recession in the economy, and the method by which a lot of multinational companies were doing business around the globe had changed. So with the evolution of all the technology and internet, www.series, there was no actual requirement of being physically present in another nation to carry out businesses in that particular nation. Also, with the multinational group expanding their horizon and creating the legal structure and all around the globe, it became difficult of what will be the taxing right of a particular nation. So in respect of India, if I talk about, a lot of investment are being made by Singapore, Mauritius, and which are rooted through this entity from say US or European nation. So there were a lot of favorable tax treaty provision which were provided in the Mauritius or Singapore tax treaty. So India were losing their taxing right. So there was a need of the hour was to frame a tax, to basically form a tax framework to tackle such situation, and also to understand what are the changes and what will be the new criteria for giving a taxing right to a particular jurisdiction. So if the company is not there physically present in a particular nation, say India, they does not get a taxing right because they have taxing right only to tax their resident. And also but they have some source based rule mechanism, but that does not cover all the situation. So we'll slowly discuss the provision in detail in future slide. So all these things need to actually being considered by all the nation, and there was a concept of double Irish Dutch sandwich, which was created by companies like Starbucks and Apple, which are all US based multinational companies, and they were utilizing their structure in a way that they were not paying tax or paying very minimal tax by using the tax havens or using such structure wherein they were getting away with without paying much tax of the fair share of tax to all the jurisdiction on which they were working. So in 2013, the G20 nation and OECD, they came together and asked the OECD to prepare basically a plan to tackle such situation. So in 2015, the OECD came out with 15 action plan. Now, this multilateral instrument is a part or an outcome of that particular action plans. They have captured each action plan and they have come out with the scenario because as we understand that there are, as of now, bilateral tax treaty arrangement between various nations. So India would have its tax treaties with a lot of nations, say Germany, Austria, US, UK, etc. Now it would be very difficult if I have to, because I have to apply the BEPS related action plans and change some tax treaties. It would be very difficult to negotiate from India perspective. It will be very difficult to negotiate with each country to change the tax treaty. So the best part, what OECD or other G20 nation thought, that is to come out with a particular instrument wherein all the signatory or the countries which were taking part in the BEPS related program, they will just be a signatory to this particular instrument, and all the changes which had to be brought in this particular tax treaty, that can be compiled in one particular instrument, and once they sign, it would be applicable throughout to all the nation. Now the problem was some nation would be agreeing to it and some nation would not be agreeing to it. So there are a lot of reservation, lot of notification and options given in this multilateral instrument under all these 39 articles which are there in the multilateral instrument. And we need to see each of the articles, all these 39 article, along with all the option, reservation and notification, and try to understand how we read the tax treaty. So this is basically the background of what we'll be discussing in our future slide. So MLI is just an outcome of OECD program I just mentioned, and it would be difficult to individually negotiate all tax treaties. So this is an instrument developed to overcome this challenge. Now this allows amendment of tax treaties without going through such cumbersome process of negotiating one-on-one tax treaty which is already there. Now, as far as the implementation of MLI is concerned, on 7 June 2017, there was a conference which was held in Paris, and 68 countries out of 125 countries which were part of the BEPS program were the signatory to MLI, including India. So on 2017, they have signed the MLI. Now, as of now, if we talk about the current scenario, there are more than 89 jurisdictions which are already the signatory to MLI. Now, there was a condition with that after the fifth notification or the ratification is submitted to the OECD, this MLI would come into force in general sense. If there are more than 5 parties which have 5 nations which have given their ratification, then only this MLI would work. Otherwise, they will dump the idea of MLI. So Slovenia in 2018 March was the 5th country to submit its ratification, after which on 1st July 2018 this MLI was given a life. Now as far as India is concerned, they have submitted their ratification instrument on 25th June 2019, and on 9th August 2019 it has notified MLI in its official gazette of India. Now if we see the current year budget of finance of 2020, Finance Act 2020 also recognized the MLI in its act, just to overcome the future litigation possibility wherein the company or the multinational could say that since there is no provision in the domestic tax law to give charge to the MLI because currently it only provides for the tax treaty which has been signed and not the MLI. So Finance Act 2020 has provided that and recognizes that MLI would be applicable and has to be seen while we discuss this tax treaty network or analyze any cross-border taxation. So secondly, just wanted to give you an overview of MLI. As I mentioned, there are total 39 articles in this multilateral instrument. So Article 1 and 2 deals with the scope of this multilateral instrument and the interpretation. And they also covered the covered tax jurisdiction. So from India perspective, Article 2, they have covered as good as 93 jurisdiction in this MLI, which they want to cover through this particular instrument. There are total 95 tax treaties arrangement, out of which they have excluded China, and there is one other island which they have excluded. Earlier, when there was provisional list prepared, Hong Kong was not there, but after the Hong Kong tax treaty was signed, India has also included Hong Kong in this particular covered tax agreement. So Article 3 to 17 provides for the BEPS action plan measures. There are few measures which were there in the BEPS action point from 1 to 15. So there were hybrid mismatches. So Article 3 to 5 covers those scenario. Then there were treaty abuse. These are the minimum standards, and Article 6 to 11 of the multilateral instrument talks about this treaty abuse scenario of how to curb this treaty abuse cases. Next was the avoidance of permanent establishment status. Now, this is very important for us because this is the area wherein India would be impacted. Indian company would be Indian tax professional or financial professional needs to focus their energy on, because this is the area which probably would impact us more. And the Article 12 to 15 of the multilateral instrument talks about this avoidance of PE status. Then from 16 and 17 talks about the dispute resolution mechanism, which was discussed in the OECD G20 nation. Thereafter, they talk about the mandatory binding arbitration proceeding that covers Article 18 to Article 26 of the MLI. And then from 27 to 39, they talks about the enforceability of MLI, which covers the ratification or how and when it will come into force, and when will this exit or any withdrawal of provision, etc. Now, as I mentioned, Article 6 and Article 7, they cover the minimum standard, and they are about the prevention of treaty abuse. Also, Article 16 is another minimum standard which is compulsory for all the participants or signatory to follow and apply in their tax treaty. Now, opting out of this minimum standard could be very tricky, and it is not possible until and unless you already have that particular provision in your existing tax treaty, and it should cover all tax treaty per se and not one or two tax treaties. So without fail, ultimately the idea is to cover all the minimum standard which was provided under BEPS Action Plan 6 and Action Plan 14 under this multilateral instrument. Other than that, there are few other articles which I've discussed in, say, Article 12 to 15 or 16 or 17. So these are flexible, and they have also provided choices wherein a country can choose whether they want to apply or not, and then they provide for notification criteria or the reservation. So if India has a reservation on particular article, that would not apply to the India tax treaty, and that would not be applicable on any of the India tax bilateral arrangement with any country. Now, how does this work? So I'll just give you a brief example of, suppose if India wants to amend its treaty by way of this multilateral instrument with India, with UK or Singapore. So first is that they should have that in the cover tax agreement. So India should notify UK and Singapore tax treaty in the Article 2. Now, to make this effective, UK and Singapore in return should notify India as their cover tax agreement, and then this particular MLI would be applicable. Now they have their own choices and reservation, and which we need to see on the case-by-case basis of what provision or what article existing tax treaty would be changed by this particular MLI. Now, I have just bifurcated the articles, all 39 articles, into three parts. One is obviously the minimum standard, which we have already seen, that Article 16, 7 and Article 6, which is the Article 6 is the preamble. Article 7 is the prevention of treaty abuse, which is basically the principal purpose test or the limitation of benefit clause, which are there in the tax treaty or the domestic tax law. So they have tried to cover that in the BEPS action plan as well. And then the Article 16 is the mutual agreement procedure, which is applicable. So this would be applicable on all the covered tax agreement if the countries has notified each other. So suppose India has notified Singapore and Singapore has also notified India as a covered tax agreement, all these three Article 6, 7 and 16 will be applicable on India, Singapore or India, UK tax treaty. Second case would be all the article for which it is compulsory for any jurisdiction or country to be notified. So it should be notified by both the jurisdiction or countries to make this article applicable and override the existing tax treaty provision. So just to give you an example, there is an Article 8 on dividend transfer transaction. So this article basically it's not applicable in not of much relevance in India's circumstances, but if India has applied for this particular article and Singapore has also notified this particular article, then only this will applicable. Suppose giving an example, if India has notified but Singapore has not notified this Article 8 or 9, 12, 13 or etc., which is given in the second block, then this article would fail and the original tax treaty provision would apply, and this would not be override by the multilateral instrument. Again, the third case scenario or the third bracket consists of all those articles in the multilateral instrument which provides for a specific reservation. So if India has a reservation on the transparent entity or the dual resident entity, then this would at the first place would not apply. So we don't need to see whether the other jurisdiction has made reservation or not, because India has already made reservation that I don't want to apply this article in my tax treaty. So first case would be in this bracket would be to see whether India has made any reservation or not. If India has made reservation, there is no need to study this article further. But if India has not made reservation, then you need to see whether the other jurisdiction, whether Singapore or Netherlands, has made this reservation. If say Singapore has made reservation, then also this would not apply. But if the Singapore has also not made reservation, that means that both party has cleared this particular article, and therefore we need to study further what are the implication and how will we read this into our existing tax treaty. So this is very important. So we need to understand the just a second, I'll just close this because a lot of mails are coming.
Notification
Yeah.
can hide, then it's good here.
Sorry, Mr. Khurana, you were saying something?
I was saying notification is coming, I think from Skype or somewhere.
Yeah, I've removed that.
Okay, no issue. Please carry on.
Sure. So this was the basic overview about the article on the three brackets. One would be the minimum standard, which we don't need to go into further detail because this would apply into all the tax treaties which have covered India as a CTA. Second bracket would be whether the other jurisdiction has notified India and India has notified that particular article. And third would be to check the reservation. So we need to see case by case basis how will we read this article into our existing tax treaty. So just coming on to the India's position on all this important articles. So as I mentioned, the first article was the interpretation of terms or the notification of covered tax agreement. As I've already mentioned that India has notified almost all its tax treaty other than China, and there's one other island. Other than that, India has covered all the existing tax treaties under the covered tax agreement. So from India tax perspective, it's very clear that they want to change their tax treaty with all the jurisdiction and they want this MLI to apply. But we need to see whether other jurisdiction has also covered India as a CTA party. If not, then this MLI question of MLI does not arise. Just giving you an example, since India has not covered China, we don't need to see whether MLI would be impacting China, because that scenario has not been covered. Also, just taking another example of Germany. Now, Germany has of not yet submitted their final ratification to OECD, but as of now in their provisional list, they have not covered India as a covered tax party or the agreement. So in that case, if they also submit this final ratification in which India is not a part, then India-Germany original tax treaty would suffice, and this MLI would not apply on the India-Germany tax treaty. Coming on to the third article, which is the transparent entity. So this is nothing but a case of partnership firms which are there in UK or other European countries, or various other jurisdiction, wherein the partnership income is not taxed in the partnership in the hands of partnership firm, but it's taxed in the hands of partnership on their ratios. So whatever income, say 100 rupees is earned by the partnership firm, it's not getting taxed in the partnership firm hands, but say there are three partners with equal profits, so one third income is directly taxed in the hands of all the partner. So this basically, whether the question was whether treaty benefit would apply to this partnership. If say UK partnership has a or say Germany or other jurisdiction partnership has a transaction with India. So the question would be whether this treaty benefit would be applicable to this physically transparent entity, which is partnership, or not. So in that case, there has been reservation used by India for not applying this article, because this article was saying that the treaty benefit would be applicable to this transparent entity. So the existing tax treaty as it is would apply as far as the transparent entities are concerned, and this article, because India has reserved this article, saying that they don't want to apply this article in their existing bilateral tax treaty arrangement. So this particular article is of no use to us, and this would not apply. The existing judicial precedents such as Linklater or the other jurisdiction of Mumbai Tax Tribunal, there were many. So that would continue to apply, and we have to see the case by case basis whether the tax treaty benefit on such particular fiscal transparent entity would apply or not. But as far as MLI is concerned, it does not apply, and therefore litigation in this regard would continue to be there. Second, the article number 4 would be the dual resident entities. Now, this is the case wherein the two jurisdiction competent authority would sit together and mutually decide the residential status of, not for individuals. So this particular article is not for individuals. Say if a partnership firm or a company having a place of effective management, then they have a case of dual residency. Now in that case, there is a requirement that competent authority of two countries will sit together and they'll decide the residential status of that particular entity. Now in case of disagreement, there is no way out, and then every country or the jurisdiction would have right to tax it as their residence. The important point to note here is that India has not reserved this particular article. Therefore, this article would apply, and this needs to be seen. So, in case of any case of place of effective management which is there, which we are facing, and if we need to see that dual resident entities case is apply, so we need to see, because this article would be applicable, so we need to see the other jurisdiction. For example, we need to see whether Singapore, since they have included India as CTA, we need to see whether they have also reserved this article or not. If they have reserved, we don't need to go further, but if they have also not reserved, then we need to see, and then the case of competent authority sitting together and deciding the residential status for particular entity would arise, and this would then be applicable and would be binding on the tax treaty, would be overriding on the existing tax treaty. Similarly, on the application of method to eliminate double taxation. Now you will find this particular article already there in all the India's tax treaty, and they are continuing to apply with the credit method, barring for few 4 or 5 tax treaty wherein they provide for the exemption method for elimination of double taxation. So this is nothing but providing the foreign tax credit on any income which is taxed in other jurisdiction as well, and then they provide for the credit for taxes paid there as per their laws and as per Indian laws, whichever is lower. So that particular option India has said that they'll apply, and there are other two option A and option B also, which India has excluded. So we need to, for this particular article, we need to see the tax treaty arrangement. India already has the credit method provided in the existing tax treaty. Even otherwise, if the other countries has provided reservation for this particular article, since they already have this particular tax treaty arrangement, so for Indian resident, it will be very important that they compute their foreign tax credit on this option C, which is credit method. Now, Article 6 is, as I mentioned earlier, that Article 6 forms part of the mandatory or the minimum standard. So it is very simple article, which is basically the preamble, and which provides that the intention is to avoid creation of opportunity for the countries to create a situation of double non-taxation or reducing their tax liability in particular jurisdiction through evasion or avoidance. Basically, the idea was a lot of multinational companies were using their structure in a way that they used to have their entity in the tax haven countries, and then they end up paying tax nowhere or minimum tax on the overall structure on the group basis. So this is the minimum standard, and if India has covered any jurisdiction as a CTA and that particular country has also covered India as a CTA, this would apply. Now this Article 7 is again a minimum standard, but with certain options. Now the first option is the PPT or the principal purpose test. What is this principal purpose test? Is that the main purpose of using a particular tax treaty network is if that is to avoid tax or reduce group tax, then this particular article will be triggered, and then the tax authority of particular jurisdiction could say that since you have used this particular treaty just to avoid the tax or ignore the tax or reduce your tax burden, and there is no commercial substance behind this particular using this particular treaty framework, and therefore this particular treaty benefit will not be applicable. So this is what this particular article means in the MLI. Now there are other options as well that you can supplement this PPT test with a simplified LOB, which if you see the current structure of India Singapore, it says that you need to have certain investment in Singapore, say 2 lakh USD on year basis or etc. There could be other scenario which could be inbuilt in this particular tax treaty network, which India already has with few treaty. And then there could be an option of having a detailed limitation of benefit clause supplemented by a mechanism to deal with conduit arrangement. So they can bring in certain provision wherein they make sure that they have a commercial substance, the entity, and then only they'll provide the tax treaty benefit to particular entity. Now, India's, if we talk about the India final position on this particular article, they have opted for PPT plus the simplified LOB. But PPT being the minimum standard, it will apply to all the covered tax agreement. And secondly, we need to see whether the other jurisdiction has also applied for simplified LOB clause or for the detailed LOB clause, and then the other provision would be applicable. So just to simplify this particular arrangement, PPT would be applicable on all covered tax agreement. But if say India has also opted for this simplified LOB clause, and Singapore has also opted for simplified LOB clause, then this particular LOB clause would be applicable with India-Singapore tax treaty arrangement. But if Singapore has not chosen for this option, then PPT clause would be applicable, but we don't need to see the SLOB clause. Again, on the dividend transfer transaction, which is Article 8, it is very simple. It provides for 365 days minimum threshold period. So if the threshold period for particular investment in a jurisdiction from, say, if US has invested in India for more than 365 days, then only the benefit of dividend taxation or the reduced tax treaty rates or the beneficial ownership concept needs to be seen. If that is applicable and the minimum threshold is more than 365 days, then this particular tax treaty benefit would be applicable. Otherwise, it will not be applicable. So India has notified this Article 8, and if the other country has also notified, then this particular article would overrule the existing tax treaty arrangement. If the other country has not notified this particular Article 8, then the existing tax treaty framework would be applicable, and this Article 8 we don't need to go into further detail. Here, very interesting case we need to see is that India-Portugal tax treaty already has such clause, and they provide for 24 months period as a minimum threshold period. So India has excluded India-Portugal tax treaty as far as Article 8 is concerned, and the original 24 months minimum threshold need to be seen when we check the India-Portugal tax treaty arrangement. Similarly, Article 9 provides for capital gain transaction. Now, interestingly, in our domestic tax law, there were a lot of changes when there was Vodafone case, which was pronounced in January 2012. After that, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister, and he had made a lot of changes in the domestic tax law as far as capital gain transaction was concerned, pursuant to Vodafone ruling, to overrule basically the Vodafone ruling in that particular scenario. Now, that also provided for the similar provision, which are now being considered by OECD and G20 nation, and they have provided two particular scenario. One is that if a jurisdiction, they have provided for minimum threshold of 365 days as similar to dividend transaction. So if a US company has invested in India for a minimum period of 365 days, then only the benefit of tax treaty would be applicable. They have also provided for an optional provision which provides that the value which is derived from the capital gain value which is derived from India should be more than 50% directly or indirectly from this immovable property in India. So as far as India is concerned, this provision is already in their domestic tax law. Also, Article 9, India has opted for both the provision. One is that the minimum threshold provision needs to be satisfied, and the other is the 50% criteria. So if the other country has also notified this Article 9 in their as a CTA in their MLI, then this particular Article 9 would be applicable in the tax treaty framework. Now, Article 10 and Article 11 are not very much relevant from India perspective, because India's laws are very simple in that case, but this would per se be applicable to countries like Ireland and Netherlands, wherein all this double Irish Dutch sandwich structure was used, and the P was created in some other country, and the benefit or the taxing right was shifted to the P entity or where the substance was. So Article 10 provides for the triangular cases wherein in simple words, it provides that if suppose a country has a taxing right as a resident, so if a P is created in say third jurisdiction, and there is a third, there is say country A, which is a resident country, country B, which is a P jurisdiction, and there is a country C with which this particular country A or country B has a transaction with country C. So now we need to see whether country A and country C tax treaty will be applicable, or country B, country A, C tax treaty would be applicable. Ideally, the transaction with P and the third country, country C, should be seen, and the tax treaty of that country should be seen. But it provides that if that particular P is created just to take advantage of country B and country C tax treaty arrangement, then in that case, if the tax benefit is more than 60% as compared to the resident country, then this particular benefit wherein the P has been created just to take advantage of tax treaty network would not be applicable. It becomes very complicated, and India has though it's not much relevant to India, it could be in some cases, but India has not reserved, so this provision would apply to India tax treaty, and we need to see whether the third jurisdiction with which we need to see the tax treaty arrangement, whether they have also reserved, then we don't need to move further. But if they have not reserved, then this particular article would be applicable. Similarly, with Article 11, it's a very plain vanilla case. of having right to tax their own resident. So India has preserved this right, and they say that we have our right to tax our own resident, and obviously on the global income. And they have said that we do not reserve this particular article. That means that they will apply this particular article in their tax treaty. So if other country has also not reserved this they don't have any reservation on this particular article, then this particular article would overrule the existing tax treaty framework. Now, Article 12 to 15 are very important from India tax perspective because they deal with the permanent establishment situation in India. As we see that there are three types of permanent establishment provided under the existing tax treaty framework. One is the fixed place permanent establishment fixed place P, second is the agency place P, and third is the service P. And then there are sub P such as the construction assembly or other supervisory P. Now, as far as fixed place P is concerned, the case is very simple that they have to have a physical presence in India. But the lot of confusion was around the agency P and the way the multinational companies were using agents in India, or they were using the related party to breach the threshold limit. So all this article which are there in the multilateral instrument, article 12, 13, 14 and 15, these are to curb such practices wherein multinational companies were using to avoid any PE status in India. So Article 12 in particular deals with the agency PE situation. Now earlier the language of PE of the tax treaty provided that PE would be created, or the agency PE would be created if they are getting work done through the dependent agent and they are habitually concluding the contract. Now they have provided, and they have widened this ambit. They provide that even if the dependent agent is playing a principal role in conclusion of a contract or other enterprises, for the other enterprises or the main enterprises, then the agency PE would be triggered. Now, there were a lot of ruling which also were of the same view, and they say that if the official signing of the contract was not necessary, and even if they are playing the principal role in negotiating the contract, the PE would be applicable. So India had always the reservation in the OECD, and they were following this practice. But just to bring it to into the tax treaty, they have specifically provided that Article 12 would apply. They have notified this particular article, and then which will widen the agency payee scope in the tax treaty itself, because so that there is no further litigation or the scope of litigation. Now we need to see whether the other CTA which India has notified has also notified this particular article. If that has not been notified with by the other jurisdiction, this Article 12 will not apply, and then we need to go back into the original tax treaty and the judicial precedent, because India has a reservation on this particular aspect as well, and need to see whether how will we then play around this agency PE situation. Secondly, on the artificial avoidance of PE through specific activity exemption, this deals with the article. Suppose if PE article is Article 5, and they were certain in OECD, there were certain sub Article 4 which provided for preparatory and auxiliary services. If the activity qualifies as preparatory and auxiliary, then it would not create a PE in India or PE in particular jurisdiction. So this Article 13 has provided for two scenarios. One is option that all these activity which are listed in the subset 4, or the examples of preparatory and auxiliary, then all these activity individually and together should qualify as preparatory and auxiliary. So we do not need to see individually all the activity, but need to see the transaction as a whole to check whether our entire transaction which are being done in India, whether they are still the preparatory and auxiliary, or whether if put together the preparatory and auxiliary tests fail, and on individually basis it may still be satisfied. So that aspect need to be seen, and this option A provides that we need to see as an overall basis and not on the individual case basis. This particular Article 13 also provides for anti-fragmentation rule. It means that if say there are two sister company in say UK and Singapore, and company A in India is doing some activity which still qualifies in preparatory and auxiliary, and company B sitting in Singapore do some activity in India, and they also satisfy this preparatory and auxiliary. And this has been done just to avoid, because if we combine together the activities of company A and company B, and if put together, we may see that the entire activity as a whole does not satisfy this preparatory or the auxiliary definition. So the anti-fragmentation rule say that we need to, if there are related party and if they are carrying out any activities in India, we need to see as a whole combined of all the related parties as well. So this particular Article 13 has been notified by India, and India has chosen option A. That means that P is available if we need to see on the overall basis. India has also notified anti-fragmentation rule. Now, for this particular Article 13 to apply in the existing tax treaty, since India has already notified this particular article, we need to see again the other jurisdiction position also, and see whether that particular jurisdiction has also notified this article in their MLI. And if they have notified, then only we'll go further and see the tax treaty read with MLI. Otherwise, we'll leave it there. Then there is a concept of splitting off of contract. Now, this is again very simple and similar to the anti-fragmentation rule. Suppose if India has provided for 6-month threshold for a construction period in India, and there are two related parties, one doing the engineering and the other doing the supervision work. Now, to avoid the P in India, they could structure in a way that one company does the engineering work for 5 months and the other company does the supervisory work for another 5 months, and then they avoid the P in India. So this particular article is to deal with such scenario wherein they have divided their work in such a fashion that P will not be triggered in India, and they say that the activities of related parties, say company A providing the engineering and company B providing the supervisory, will be combined, and then they will see whether the threshold is breached or not. So the country had to provide the reservation if they had any on this particular article, and India has not reserved. That means that they want to apply this particular article in their existing tax treaty framework. So this article would apply in this while dealing with this construction P scenario. We need to see whether the other jurisdiction country, if company A and B is the case, we need to see both the jurisdiction and whatever is beneficial or suiting to India, and see if they have also notified or have not reserved this particular article, this would apply. And this would obviously become complicated, because considering a scenario that suppose Singapore and UK case, say that UK may have reserved this particular application of this article, but Singapore may not have reserved. So India could again say that since Singapore has not reserved this particular article, and this particular Article 14 would apply in the tax treaty, but taxpayer would say that I am more to link towards the UK side of it, and UK has reserved this particular article, and therefore this particular splitting up of contract provision should not apply in the tax treaty. So there would be some litigation on that also, and some tussles we need to see. Now, Article 15 is just the definition which is provided by the on this particular MLI on the anti-fragmentation or the splitting of contract, which is related to the related party. So what all, how well one would say that there are related party or not, that is defined in the Article 15. And as similar on the similar line, India has not reserved. So we need to see whether reservation has been given by the other jurisdiction or not. And this Article 12 to 15 are the most relevant article which we need to see, and this is the article which we will deal on day-to-day basis while dealing with the international cross-border transactions. Now, as far as Article 16 is concerned, this is the minimum standard. But as I already mentioned, that there are ways to deal with minimum standard as well, and there are options provided for minimum standard as well. If provided the existing tax framework or the tax treaty already has such provision. So India has said that I will not apply this Article 16 in our tax treaty, because we already have a provision of mutual agreement procedures with all our tax treaty networks. So from India perspective, this article is of no relevance, because it already has similar provision in their existing tax framework. Also, Article 17, this provide for corresponding adjustment. Now, you would be aware that from transfer pricing perspective, there was a secondary adjustment concept which was introduced, and it's already there in the domestic tax law. This has also been provided by the tax treaty network now under the MLI concept. Article 18 to 26, it's nothing but just the mandatory binding arbitration, and India has chose to be opt out of this because India don't want to create a situation wherein the foreign companies are taking or dragging India to the arbitration courts. So this particular Article 18 to 26 not being a minimum standard, they have simply chosen out of it. So for all the beneficial provision which increases the taxing rights of India, in a way they have chose to opt for it, and for all the rights wherein there was some kind of arbitration mechanism or some kind of like Article 3, I mentioned that transparent entities giving up right to the or treaty benefit to the physical transparent entity. India has simply chose not to apply all those article in their existing tax treaty framework by way of a MLI. Now, if we see the impact on our tax treaty from April 1st, 2020, there are total 23 jurisdictions, of which the tax treaty framework would be changed by the MLI. These are listed in the table on your screen. Now, important is to see what could be the impact on this. So, as I mentioned, the minimum standard we need to see, and the principal purpose test would obviously apply. Then we need to see what choices, reservation, or notification has been done by the other jurisdiction, because India has covered almost all the CTA. So we need to check the position of other jurisdiction as well. So when we sit for a particular transaction, we need to see that with which country India has the transaction. Suppose it has a transaction with Singapore. So we need to first place the India-Singapore tax treaty and read it through. Then we need to see the position taken by India on its MLI. And again, we need to see the position which has been taken by the Singapore. The best part is that India has, or income tax department has now placed the synthesized tax of the application, or the basically all the changes which were there, which would be there in the tax treaty. So they have considered the India's position, and they have considered the Singapore position taken by Singapore position, and whatever the impact is to make the life of a tax professional easier, they have provided the synthesized tax, and we need to see the synthesized tax while dealing with the transaction with a particular jurisdiction. So that is one point which we need to see. And where will this particular MLI would come into picture? This would come when when we are seeing any tax withholding scenario from April 1st, 2020. So any cases wherein any withholding was to be done earlier, or when we decided that withholding was not to be done earlier, we need to see the impact of MLI now and see whether the withholding is still required to be done or not. This would specifically be done in a no P certificate which was issued by the foreign company. So now, while dealing with such no P certificate, it needs to be more robust, and we need to see whether all this MLI related amendment are be made part of this no P certificate or not. So it will be very important for us, for our fraternity, for tax professional or finance professional, to see if we are getting the no P certificate, or if we are signing off anything, the impact of MLI is duly taken into consideration. Similarly, on the 15 CACB, while we issue the 15 CACB, we need to be very mindful of the fact that now the MLI could come into all these 23 jurisdiction. There could be an impact of MLI, so this needs to be seen and well documented. And if anything is to be taken as a representation letter or something, the CA should obviously take that particular in its record and document it for future purposes. So this was basically from MLI perspective. Now, this MLI is an outcome of OECD. There are other outcome as well. So there was one action point one on taxation of the digital transaction, which was discussed while giving the 15 action point report by the OECD. Now, the sad part was that few countries such as America or United States, which had the lot of this digital e-commerce operators in their jurisdiction operating worldwide, they don't want that the taxing right should go from US to India or any developing country. So they were not ready to deal with the Section 1, and there was no consensus which was achieved to how to tax this digital transaction. So at that point of time, because there were no consensus achieved, the OECD has provided 3 interim measures to deal with how to tax with this e-commerce transaction. The first option which was given was the significant economic presence, which India has already introduced in the domestic tax law, and going forward, this particular aspect is still under consideration with OECD and G20 nation. And in December 2020, they are expecting that some result out of this on the threshold of revenue or the threshold of number of transaction which has to be there in particular jurisdiction, then this particular significant economic presence would apply on the bilateral arrangement as well. And this is nothing but a business connection or a permanent establishment on the market basis rather than the physical presence or the value creation basis, because now the idea is to give the taxing right where the market or the customers are sitting and not where the value is being created. Basically, this is more to deal with the immovable or the intangible right concerned with the user based market. Second option was to impose a withholding tax on the digital transaction. And third was the equalization levy. So India, being a front runner on taxing all the BEPS, applying all the BEPS related measures, they have introduced each one of the particular option given by the OECD, and they have introduced significant economic presence, which would be applying from 2023. Withholding tax they have already introduced on many digital transaction, and equalization levy earlier in 2016, they have provided for the equalization levy of 6% on the online advertisement and related service. Now, while dealing with such equalization levy on online advertisement, the incidence of tax was on the Indian resident or the permanent establishment of foreign company in India, which was taking the services and not earning the income. So if a company in India is taking services from Facebook for advertisement or Google from advertisement, while paying, suppose the transaction they had to pay $100, they were supposed to deduct $6 as an equalization levy, withhold it, and pay 94 to the Google or the Facebook. Now, as far as this new equalization levy, which has been brought on the e-commerce operator on their e-commerce supply of goods or services, the incidence is on the non-resident party vis-a-vis the resident party on the earlier equalization levy. The levy is would be levied at the rate of 2%. The language used in particular the amendment is such that it seems that they're trying to tax all the transaction, even if suppose which the foreign company is providing in India, supply of goods or services which they are providing in India using the digital platform or electronic facility. Now, if I use my mobile phone or I use my email, it could very well be said that I am using an electronic mode for ordering any goods or ordering any services. And if they are using that uh, particular mode to take the order, it could be said in a wide sense or in a loose interpretation sense that the equalization levy would be applicable on that particular transaction as well, wherein the purchase order is being made via phone or via email. So it's a very absurd way of defining the important key terms in a particular amendment, and it creates a lot of confusion and a lot of clarity is expected from the government. Now, the worst part was that this was not introduced in the finance bill, which was laid down before the parliament on 1st February. This was introduced just before when it was being discussed in Lok Sabha, and amidst the condition of the lockdown situation, this was passed without much discussion, I would say. And now the finance ministry was also not working or working from home in that case, and they have started working now. So some kind of FAQs or clarification should be expected from government, at least on the key aspect of whether they want to include all such transaction also. And important part would be there could be various scenario wherein the transaction would already be getting taxed under the source rule basis. So the intention cannot be such that they want to double tax a particular kind of income. So I'll discuss all this part in our future slide. Um, the important part is that a lot of European nation has also introduced a similar kind of levy in their domestic tax law. That's a unilateral measure adopted by most of the European nations, and this is called digital service taxation. So India has tried to adopt this digital service tax under the equalization levy. However, the terminology used or the definition for key terms used is in such a way that it gives a very wide interpretation, and in cases it gives a weird interpretation, trying to say that everything which is there in the cross-border transaction would come under the equalization levy. So just to give you a brief of what basically the law is, it's applicable on the non-resident e-commerce operator, which are providing e-commerce supply or services to a person which is resident in India, or a non-resident in specified circumstances, or a person who buys such goods or services using Indian IP. Now, the specified circumstances could be a case wherein the advertisement or the data for that particular uh, uh, database is created in India or by using the IP of India. So anything which has to be done with digitally operations of India, and then particular data is sold outside India, they also want to tax this, even if the particular entity which is sitting outside India is collecting the India data based on the Indian IP. That particular transaction between the non-resident and a non-resident would also get covered under the equalization levy. Now, important point coming on to the meaning of economic operator and meaning of e-commerce supply or services. E-commerce operator is defined as a person who owns, operates, or manages digital or electronic facility or platform for online sale of goods or online provision of services, or both. So it's on a very prima facie view, it seems very wide. So digital platform or electronic facility especially could be telephone or could be a mobile, and taking order, or suppose if I have a know-how arrangement, I am providing a services, say IT support services or know-how services via an electronic mode, or I am sending some goods using the electronic modes, then that particular transaction would also get covered under equalization levy, even if such transaction is already being taxed under a source rule. So that's a confusion which requires clarification from government. Now, coming on to the definition of e-commerce supply or services, it provides that the online sale of goods which is owned by the e-commerce operator. Now, e-commerce operator is defined very wide. So only any online sale of goods or online provision of services, or online sale of goods or provision facilitated by the e-commerce operator, or any combination of above. So this would get covered under the equalization levy. So online sale of goods or online provision, it's a very wide term. Now, they have also provided this specific exclusion, but that does not clarify the earlier confusion. So they say that if e-commerce operator has a P in India, that would be outside the equalization purview. They say that if it is already covered under the online advertisement or related services, it would be outside this particular purview. And then they provided for the threshold of INR 20 million or euro 250,000 in a particular financial area. If the sale or turnover or gross receipt is less than this particular item, then the equalization levy would not apply. And they have not clarified what they meant by this particular sale or turnover. If a company has a sale or turnover of more than INR 20 million, but the online part of it is say only 5 million. So whether this equalization levy would get triggered or not, this is again a question which requires more clarification from the government side. Now they have provided for the compliance requirement. They have provided for quarterly payment of equalization levy, and the incidence is on the non-resident, and then they provide for an annual statement, same as earlier equalization levy compliances. Now the question comes whether tax treaty benefit would apply on the case of equalization levy or not. So various tax official on public platform has announced or made a statement stating that this equalization levy forms part of Finance Act 2016. It has been specifically excluded from the income tax law provision and not covered under the Income Tax Act 1961 related amendment. Accordingly, tax treaty benefit will not be applicable on the equalization levy. However, the basic concept, if we go and see the intention of equalization levy, it comes from the OECD discussion, which have given the option to charge this equalization levy on the income of um, income of a particular company sitting outside India. And when India was signing this tax treaty arrangement, it was binding. It's always binding as per the constitution. They have to be abide by the tax treaty arrangement. And just by including a particular levy by way of a separate charge, whether they can exclude or they can say that this tax treaty benefit would not be available on the particular income on which the constitution say that the income tax is levy on the income of a particular transaction, then question arises whether tax treaty benefit will be available or not. So this also needs a lot of clarification, and we can see a lot of litigation on this particular aspect. So coming on to the issue, I have already discussed the applicability of tax treaty. This is one question which would need a lot of deliberation. Also, the question of constitutional validity of equalization levy can be challenged because it's a unilateral measure, and we need to see whether specifically from the service component, whether India has a constitution right to levy equalization levy under the constitution if they separately has the Income Tax Act to tax such transaction. Second question or issue would be the impact on the regular supply or goods of services used by using the electronic mode such as email or mobile communication. So whether all this regular supply of goods would get covered under the equalization levy or not. This is one area which would need clarification. Third and fourth, I have also briefly discussed whether, but if a company A is providing IT support services to a company B sitting in India, this very well get classified or qualified as a e-commerce supply of services. Then whether this would be applicable, this would trigger the equalization levy, or whether this would continue to be taxed under the existing income tax law on the source roll read with the tax treaty network. So this is one question which we need to clarify. Uh, Fourth is the transfer of know-how, which is again on the similar line as IT support services. Now, there is one very interesting point to note here is that the Income Tax Act, there is some amendment in the Income Tax Act, Section 1050, which has been provided under the Income Tax Act, White Finance Act 2020. It provides that any income which is subject to equalization levy will be exempt from income tax in India, but the income should have been received from on or after 1st April 2021. But the question which needs to be seen is that the equalization levy is applicable on particular income from 1st April 2020. So what will happen to all those income which is earned between 1st April 2020 and 31st March 2021? Whether they will be taxed under both the cases, under equalization levy 1 and again under the Income Tax Act. This cannot be the intention. There appears to be some technical error while drafting. So we need to wait and see if any clarification is provided by the government in due course. Now, it would be important to see the cases wherein the foreign company issue any sales return or any credit note. There is no specific provision of how to deal with such scenario. So we need to see how will this particular, if we have already paid equalization levy on a particular transaction and then later we find out that there was a sales return or credit note, how to claim a refund if there is a just a one-time transaction entered into by a non-resident company, then whether they will be eligible for refund and how do they report such transaction in the annual statement, some clarification needs to be made by the government in this regard. So this was it on basic overview of equalization levy and multilateral instrument. I specifically want to make a statement here is that the equalization levy is very new, and the way it has been introduced without any discussion in the parliament, and because of the lockdown situation, government was not able to discuss this with the relevant tax holder, and in a way it was in a hurry to replicate the digital service tax, which has already been applied by a lot of EU nation, despite the threats from the US companies. So we need to see whether there is still any clarification which will be introduced by the government on this transaction or on this particular tax or not. So now I'll hand over to Mr.